At first, they thought it was just a huge grizzly, injured, motionless, oddly silent. Two hikers found him sprawled by the creek, his black fur drenched, his breath faint. He didn't growl, didn't move, just stared. When the rescue team finally got there, the vet knelt beside the massive bear to examine him. But what she uncovered beneath that huge frame made her freeze. Her face went pale. What lay underneath him wasn't what anyone expected. Because this isn't just a story about a wounded animal. It's a story of devotion, of instinct, of a bond so powerful it could shatter you. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so we can keep sharing true stories like this, stories that show the wild still holds deeper love than we imagine. The trail they were on was barely marked. One of those forgotten, frost-covered paths on the southern edge of Glacier National Park where tourists don't go and locals avoid once fall hits. But Liam and Casey weren't typical hikers. They were trained wildlife volunteers out there to monitor camera traps and report signs of poaching if needed. They were halfway through their loop when they saw him. At first it looked like a shadow, curled beneath the trees. But as they neared the river bend, it stayed still, massive, soaking wet. A male grizzly, unmistakable, lying sideways, a single paw twitching in the snow. Casey instinctively grabbed Liam's arm. "Don't move!" But there was no reaction. No growl, no shift. Just the rise and fall of slow, shallow breaths. Liam raised the binoculars. "Something's wrong." They watched, whispered, then carefully backed away to radio for help. The ranger station was nearly 2 hours out, with light fading fast. They marked the spot and hurried back. The rescue team made it just after dark. 2 rangers and Dr. Haley Mendes, a field vet with years of experience. She'd seen all kinds of bear wounds, gunshots, traps, disease. But something about this bear's posture, pressed low, protective, made her stop. She approached with caution, tranquilizer ready. The bear didn't resist, not even when the dart struck. He groaned, then fell still. But what happened next was beyond anything they'd seen. As sedation took hold and the team brought lights and stretchers, Dr. Mendes leaned in to inspect his body. That's when she saw the blood. It wasn't his, it was coming from beneath him. She gently lifted a heavy foreleg and gasped. Curled tightly against the bear's chest was a cub, tiny, alive, soaked and shaking. But it wasn't alone. Silence settled around them. Even the wind through the trees seemed to hold back. Dr. Mendes froze, staring at the tiny shape nestled under the massive bear. The cub trembled. Not visibly hurt, just cold, weak, hidden. Then came a faint sound, a whimper, small and fragile, like the cub had been holding it in all this time. The second cub was even smaller, pressed beneath the bear's torso, nearly hidden under fur and debris. She was limp, barely responsive. Dr. Mendes reached in slowly, lifting the first cub while a ranger eased the bear's leg aside. The big male didn't stir, his breathing was light but steady. "He's protecting them," the vet whispered. Liam stepped forward. "Do you think they're his?" "I don't know," she said. "Male grizzlies don't usually do this." "They don't." "Guard cubs." She looked down at their fragile faces. But he did. It took 10 more minutes to fully evaluate the scene. The cubs were dangerously underweight, cold, likely without food for over a day, but alive. That alone was a small miracle. The bear, though, was in worse shape, older than expected. Deep lacerations along his side, a cracked paw. Signs of a brutal fight. But the most unusual thing was how he had positioned himself, curled just enough to form a barrier of warmth around them. It had cost him everything. The cubs were placed gently into a heated crate. Then came the stretcher for the massive male. When the truck pulled away, headlights slicing through falling snow, Liam stood motionless, watching until the red glow of taillights vanished into the trees. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He understood. That bear hadn't just come across those cubs. He'd made a choice to stay, to suffer, to protect. Back at the wildlife center, the night was a quiet whirlwind. Vets prepped fluids, Tex wrapped the cubs in towels, warming them slowly with pads and steady hands. One began to feed from a syringe, weak but hungry. The smaller cub lay still. Dr. Mendes hovered, lips pressed in a tight line. "Come on, baby." "Just a little more." The larger cub glanced toward the other room, the one holding the bear. His nose quivered, body still trembling, but his eyes weren't wild. They were waiting, certain, as if he already knew where he belonged. The building was hushed. Now, just the low hum of machines and the faint rhythm of breathing from animals recovering around them. The larger cub, now wrapped snug in a blanket under a soft heat lamp, had finally eaten. His paws twitched in sleep, small and tentative. But the smaller cub remained curled tight, unmoving, like she was trying to disappear. Dr. Mendes sat. At her side, two fingers tracing slow circles across her tiny back, whispering words that only the broken-hearted would understand. In the next room, the big bear, still under sedation, rested on a reinforced table under heat lamps. His breathing was shallow, steady. The gashes on his side had been cleaned, stitched with care. But his front paw splintered and swollen was. Worse than they thought. A deep fracture, maybe a fight. Maybe something more. What none of them could yet explain was why he had done what he did. No adult male grizzly behaves this way. It was unheard of. The next morning, Liam returned, this time with Casey and a wildlife biologist named Jordan, who specialized in mapping grizzly bloodlines. He had tracked bear patterns through collar data and remote cams for over 3 years. The moment he saw the bear in recovery, his face drained. "I know him," Jordan said softly. He opened his laptop, clicked into a folder labeled Sector B, and pulled up a series of trail cam images. There he was, same bear, scar across the muzzle, distinct markings at the shoulder. Always alone. We tagged him 4 years ago. Locals call him Bramble. He lost his mate in a mudslide. She was pregnant when it happened. Dr. Mendes' brow furrowed. "So he had a mate?" Jordan nodded. "And she had cubs?" Casey leaned closer. "You think these are hers?" "I'd, bet everything," Jordan said. Through the glass, they stared at the great bear Bramble, the loner who had vanished into the mountain passes. For years, he'd wandered silent, unseen. Now here he was, battered and broken, with 2 starving cubs tucked beneath him. He hadn't stumbled upon them, he had searched. And when he found them, alone, freezing, barely clinging to life, he became something no one expected. Their guardian, their warmth, their last chance. That night, the smaller cub stirred. She didn't cry, didn't make a sound. She simply lifted her head and turned toward the glass wall, toward the room where Bramble lay. He was still unconscious, still silent, but the bond between them was alive. The waiting had only just begun. And when Bramble finally opened his eyes, the very first thing he did wasn't reflex, it wasn't fear. It was an attempt to rise. Fear, urgency. His limbs jerked slightly, claws scratching weakly against the floor, as if he still thought he was in the forest, still guarding something small beneath him. Dr. Mendes entered quickly, but calmly, hands raised in quiet reassurance. "Easy now, you're safe." But Bramble wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the glass wall past it toward the cubs. From the observation room, Ava, one of the techs, murmured, "He's not trying to get out. He's looking." For them, Bramble sagged a little, his massive frame shaking. His eyes flicked from wall to corner, searching, unsure. Then he let out a sound, not a growl, not a roar, but something low and rough, nearly a cough, filled with aching grief. It froze the room. Dr. Mendes leaned closer to the glass. "He's calling them." The larger cub stirred first. He rose from his blanket and toddled to the end of the kennel, pressing both front paws to the window. The smaller cub followed, slower, still weak, but drawn to that voice, that sound that felt like home. The center's protocol prohibited cubs from contact with adult males, especially outside of formal rehabilitation setups. But this wasn't textbook. This was something deeper, something that couldn't be categorized. By midday, a decision was made. A supervised enclosure would be arranged. A secure, naturalistic space just behind the center, with logs to climb, snow to paw through, warm shelters, and round-the-clock monitoring. No one knew how much time Bramble had left. His lungs were delicate, his body was giving out. But he had lived for those cubs, and now, they were beginning to live because of him. That evening, under a sky thick with snowflakes, Bramble was wheeled into the enclosure. He rose slowly, wobbly, immense, noble, and sniffed the air. Then the crate behind him opened. The cubs hesitated. They blinked at the trees, at the pale clouds, at the quiet. And then they saw him. The larger cub bounded forward. The smaller one stumbled after him, and together they reached Bramble. There was no fear, no hesitation. They melted into him, pressing into his warmth. He curled his frame around them just like he had in the woods, one massive paw draped over both tiny bodies. And then for the first time in days Bramble closed his eyes. Not from pain, from peace. Inside the observation station, no one spoke. Even Casey, ever composed, swiped at her face with a gloved hand. Liam let out a breath he hadn't realized. He'd been holding, he waited, he said quietly. The whole time? Dr. Mendes nodded once, voice low. And now he can rest? The quiet didn't last. For 3 days, Bramble and the cubs lived in that snowy pen, a little pocket of calm behind the center. The cubs grew bolder, exploring, chasing one another across the logs. Bramble never wandered far. He stayed near the rock wall, eyes half open, watching them, breathing them in, as if he still couldn't quite believe they were safe. But on the 4th morning, something changed. Dr. Mendes heard it first in the observation feed, a rattle in his chest, faint and uneven. Pauses that went too long. Without a word, she ran boots slicing through the cold. Dr. Mendes pushed through the frost, breath sharp in the cold, and found Bramble on his side, struggling to breathe. His eyes opened as she approached, glazed, exhausted. The cubs were curled against his chest. She knelt just outside the fence. Hey, stay with me. By noon he could no longer rise. His vitals dipped unpredictably. Blood work showed kidney failure, trauma-related stress, likely a slow-moving internal infection from those old wounds. They had cleaned and sutured what they could, but something deeper had started to slip away. Jordan paced nearby. He was holding on for them, he muttered. And now that they're okay, he's letting go, Dr. Mendes nodded. It's not just his body, it's everything. He's been driven by something stronger than instinct. Love, maybe, purpose. The team faced a difficult decision: sedate him again, attempt aggressive treatment, extend the inevitable, or let him remain in the enclosure. In the snow, surrounded by what he'd fought so hard to protect. Hours passed in quiet debate. Then, the call came from the State Wildlife Commission. The cubs were healthy enough for relocation approved for transfer to a sanctuary, where they grow strong until ready for monitored release. The transport would leave at first light. It would be their last night together. Dr. Mendes didn't hesitate. She stepped into the pen slowly, reverently, and sat a few feet away. Bramble raised his head slightly. She met his gaze not as a vet, but as someone who understood. You did it, she whispered. They're safe. The cub stirred, warm in his fur. The bigger one snuggled beneath his leg. The smaller one, stronger now, blinked up at the sky and released a soft, contented exhale. Snow began to fall soft, drifting like a quiet farewell from the forest itself. That night, beneath a starlit sky, Bramble passed. No struggle, no sound, only stillness. At dawn, Dr. Mendes found him, wrapped gently around the cubs one last time. They were awake. They didn't cry, they didn't move. It was as if they already understood. The sanctuary sat nestled deep in the Bitterroot Valley, hidden from roads and noise between two pine-studded ridgelines, a place for beginnings that came after endings. When the cubs arrived, they didn't emerge right away. The handlers gave them time, opening the crate door and stepping back. The larger cub went first, sniffing the cold air, scanning the space. He turned briefly, as if hoping to see someone just out of reach. The smaller cub followed, cautious and quiet, ears flicking at every sound. They never strayed far from one another, never more than a few steps apart. They didn't play. Not yet. A part of them still lingered in the place they had left behind. Dr. Mendes hadn't gone with them. She stayed behind to oversee Bramble's burial, a quiet resting place at the forest's edge, near where he had first been found. No plaque, no sign. Just a natural stone, left unmarked, the kind he might have rested against, watching the cubs in silence. The next day she visited alone. Kneeling at the stone, she placed a pine branch at its base. Most wouldn't have. "Done what you did?" she said softly. And fewer still would have done it expecting nothing in return. Back at the sanctuary, the cubs began slowly to adapt. They explored the enclosure's edge, climbed a low stump, nibbled the bark of a fallen log. Small things, but progress. The handlers kept their distance, letting the cubs move at their own pace. No rush, no pressure. Healing would take time. But it had begun. Each evening, just before dusk, the cubs would return to the same corner of the pen, the one facing west, where the sun dipped behind the hills where they had last seen him. It became a ritual, a quiet vigil, the staff noticed. One day, Rachel, a soft-spoken tech, placed a single round stone in that corner, then another, then a third. By the end of the week, a small mound had formed, not a grave, not a monument, just a memory they could touch. One evening, beneath an orange-streaked sky, the smaller cub lay beside the stones and placed her paw gently atop the highest one. No sound, no cry. Just stillness and something like acceptance. That night, for the first time, they played, not wildly. Not for long, but enough. Enough to remember what it felt like to be safe. The kind of safety he had given them, not through strength or dominance, but through something far rarer. He had chosen to stay, and that choice had saved them. Spring came late that year. The snow clung to the ridges as if the mountain itself wasn't ready to let go. At the sanctuary, the cubs had grown. Their fur thickened. Their eyes gleamed with the mischief of youth. They ran now fast and clumsy, tumbling over each other like children drunk on daylight. But always at dusk, they returned to that corner. The mound of stones remained, untouched, unchanged. Sometimes they would lie beside it, heads resting on crossed paws, gazing west, waiting, hoping, remembering. No one ever told them he was gone. But they had always known. At the wildlife center, Dr. Mendes stood in the clearing where Bramble had first been found. Now the forest was green. Birds chattered overhead. A deer picked its way through the brush. She reached into her coat and withdrew a worn envelope, a letter she had written weeks ago but never sent. It was addressed to no one. She opened it, read the final lines in silence, and tucked it beneath the large stone at his resting place. It said, "You reminded me what mercy looks like, not in heroes, not in humans, but in silence, in sacrifice, in staying. You didn't roar. You didn't run. You just stayed. And because of that, they lived. Because of that, we remember you." She stood for a while longer, her breath visible in the crisp air, and then turned and walked back toward the center. Slow, steady, changed back at the sanctuary. The cubs were nearing their final phase of Kara soft release program, deep in protected land. Not full wildness. Not yet, but the beginning of it. A place to learn the rhythm of the forest. To continue the life Bramble had given them. When the time came, the transport gate opened. Neither cub hesitated. They stepped forward together, pausing only once to look back. Then they disappeared into the trees. Rachel stood with one hand resting on the open gate. "You think they'll remember?" she asked. Liam, who had come to say goodbye, didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, "they already do." They already do. Months passed, seasons shifted, and somewhere high in the mountains, two young bears wandered. The Ridgelines. They played, they hunted, they grew, but in the quietest hours just before nightfall they still paused and looked west, toward the memory of a heavy body curled around them in the snow, toward the quiet, unspoken love that had saved their lives. If this story touched your heart, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a like. Share this story with someone who believes in the quiet power of love, the kind that asks for nothing, the kind that sacrifices without applause, the kind that stays Because even in the wild, compassion leaves tracks that never fade.